fine wine all over. 5-star dining. Living my life, living my dream. Oh, shorty. Doing my thing, I'm doing my way. Only private jet keys in my yard. Oh, my private parties in my house. Mama. Fine, fine girls all over me. Fine, fine dreams all over my body. 'Cause I'm the good in a banga. I'm the good in a banga.
Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep with the Martin Delaney Center for Egyptology. And today is Nia, aka Thursday, June the 1st, 2023. And we are going to talk about a book that I recently acquired called Ancient Egyptian and Afro-Asiatic, Rethinking the Origins. And I'm just going to give some highlights about aspects of the text that I've read thus far and why it reinforces, whether it intends to or not, why Afro-Asiatic does not exist. So all that and more when we return in just a moment. And we are back. And why won't this thing come off? Here we go. Oh, so y'all can see that I need a haircut. Peace and blessings, everyone. In the place to be, this is the Mbongi. And I know it's been a minute since I've done like a lecture, so to speak. So this is kind of part review, part lecture, and the like. And so I don't want to waste any more of your time. But before I do, I want to shout out everyone who has made themselves known in the chat. So peace to Sean P. and Robert Rand, the Bar Reloaded, Sister Tamika in the building, Sister Lakeisha in the building, Che is in the house, and Kim Herbert is in the building. Anointed Sadat Amin Ra is in the building. Mr. Trey Day 90 is made it in the building, and Brother Donald Flournoy is in the building. I know I'm saying it all wrong. The Sith Lord Prince is in the building. And who else am I missing? Brother Zugichi is in the building. Teti Ursa Ma'at Ra Saneferu. Brother Shakara speaks. Big up and respect to you all the way out there in the UK. Rich the African Elder is in the building. Learn Together with Obama, not Obama, but Obama is in the building. Black to Egypt TV is in the building. Travel Light and the Jed Imunk Ra, Heka Ra, I should say, is in the building. And Edward Nigma, 9x9, is in the building. 42 Tribes has made himself known. And lastly, Sister Gina A is in the building. If I skipped someone, I do apologize. I was kind of going through this fast, but I think I got everyone. So, we got EJG, aka Shango, in the building. H-Town is in the building, no doubt. Mr. Black Culture is in the building. And we got you again, but this time on Facebook. We got Brother Born, Eternal Lord Allah. Peace and blessings to you. And thank you all. And those who I miss, I know some of y'all may be viewing from Twitter. And so Twitter, if there's any comments or anything there, it doesn't show up here on StreamYard as of yet. So just want to thank you all again for joining the conversation. And so, well, before I do that, just a quick announcement. If you are in the Cleveland, Ohio area, uh, I will be doing a lecture on June the 10th. So that should be next Saturday. And it is part of a larger weekend. And so the Carter G. Woodson Committee is presenting an African marketplace and lecture at the Wings Academy at, what is the 10615 Lamontier Ave. And it's going to be 2 days of marketplace and lecture. So on the first day is going to be me, June the 10th, that's Saturday. And I'll be talking about the importance of Kemet to the cultural unity of Africa and why Kevin Hart is correct. And on Sunday, there's going to be Dr. Timothy Owen Moore, who's going to be talking about melanin, the global elite's control and attack on humanity. And so it's not a particular website that I see, but there is a phone number. So for admissions, I think it's $15 per day or $25 for both days. Phone number 216-323-6155. And you can contact that number for more information if you are in the Cleveland, Ohio, and surrounding areas. So again, that number is 216-323-6155. And if you haven't heard by now, my text, Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1, Towards a Meaning of the Place Named Kemet, is on pre-sale now. And you can go to asarimhotep.com, and which is this link here. And when you go to the shop, you can make your purchase there. And so now that it is June 1st, the book is going to be for $40 or $45 when it comes out, but you can get it at a discounted rate. So it was $25 for the month of May, but it's going to be $30 for June. So and it's going to increase until the time that it is released on August the 22nd, 2023. So when you go to the checkout, just type in the word Mbongi, and that is the word right here at top right-hand corner, MBONGI, and the discount will apply. All righty. So let me take that off. So again, the reason why I'm doing this program today, I haven't finished reading all of the text. So just letting y'all know that from the beginning. So this text just came out last month, and I've been waiting a long time for this text because in 2018, the Rethinking the Origins conference was held. There was 2 conferences actually on this in 2018. But there was a Rethinking the Origins regarding the relationship of ancient Egyptian and Afro-Asiatic. And so the proceedings from that conference from 2018, April 2018, is now published in here. So this book is about $130, $135. So, it's going to be pricey unless somebody discounts a used version. But it's a hardcover. I didn't see a paperback version. But so it is, given that it is a conference proceeding, there is a multitude of perspectives. So some of the perspectives that I'm going to talk about today may be in opposition to somebody else who wrote in the same text. So don't think that because I'm stating something from one scholar and you get the text and somebody else in here says something opposite, that I'm trying to pull the okie doke on y'all. But the main point here is, for those of you who have been following not only my work, but just the African school or the Diop school of Egyptology in linguistics, you know that since the time of Diop on to Obinga, and more recently with, myself, Bilolo, Jean-Claude Mboli, and others, have consistently argued that the way that Africanists, these are essentially European-based scholars who study African languages and cultures, the way that these Africanists have tried to categorize and organize the African groups, and including their languages, have not been sufficient and have not been supported by the evidence. And so, and we'll get into the details a little later in terms of Greenberg's groupings of African languages, Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan, and the controversies that have emerged as a result of this. And so this has great implications because, for example, you should be familiar with the fact that many of these Africanists, when they're dealing with ancient Kemet, they try their best to group the ancient Egyptians with folks in the Middle East. And you can see that there's a lot of stall tactics because when they keep going back and trying to apply the correct methods, they can't establish that from a linguistic and cultural perspective. So this is why you see this mad rush to try to look to DNA, and they're very selective in which DNA they select, to do an analysis and to try to make it seem as if the ancient Egyptian society itself is the byproduct of immigrants coming in from the Middle East, setting up shop and establishing the culture and language. And so when linguists such as Theophile Obenga and Shekinah Job in the 60s and 70s were saying, wait a minute, the ancient Egyptian language, the culture, of course, is fundamentally African, but the languages, the ancient Egyptian language and its dialects are closely related and correspond quite consistently with our native languages. Our native languages being, for Shekinah Job, the Wolof language, and for Theophile Obenga, the Mbochi language, which is a Bantu language. And so they have written text, and a lot of linguists will summarily try to dismiss their findings, right? And try to say that, that can't be the case because we've already decided that ancient Egyptian belongs to this mythological framework called Afro-Asiatic. And so because it belongs to this Afro-Asiatic, we cannot accept your proposal that these morphological, phonological, and lexical correspondences that y'all claim that y'all are finding between Wolof and Mbochi, for example, is not these cannot be legit, right? And this has major implications for trying to advance the field of Africana studies and especially Egyptology and linguistics on the continent. Because, and this has happened to me several times. Like if you write a paper and you're trying to, you have established a set of lexical correspondences, phonological correspondences, and morphological correspondences between ancient Egyptian and, let's say, Yoruba or Akan or Kikongo, isiZulu, these languages that belong outside of the so-called Afro-Asiatic, then you will get your paper rejected and they'll send it back and saying that we can't accept this because it doesn't belong to Afro-Asiatic. And the problem, well, besides the problem that Afro-Asiatic doesn't exist, you also have this issue that a lot of the vast majority of Africanists don't know how to do historical comparative linguistics. So when they come up with these ad hoc judgments, then it prevents, it's just a way for them to not validate these African scholars who speak the languages and have been trained to be able to do historical comparative linguistics. But then these folks who don't know how to do historical comparative linguistics will then try to judge and dismiss these other African scholars. And so I've gone through this several times, even more recently. So it's astounding that if you have Umoja Volume 2, which came out in 2020, that was 3 years ago, you know that when you go to chapter 9, I list a number of scholars, and I cite a number of scholars who have shown and demonstrated that Joseph Greenberg, who came up with this categorization or these categorizations of Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, these super large phylums, that they are not accepted by scholars, linguists, and things around the world. And so we're going to see this again. So I'm citing stuff as early as, the early 1900s to, up to whatever in 2020, right? So I was hoping that the proceedings from that conference that I mentioned, Rethinking the Origins, because the conference, remember, was in April of 2018. So Umoja Volume 2 did not come out until 2020. So I tried to wait 2 years for that for the proceedings to come out. And so what interested me more so than anything was the contribution by, let me get his name correct. His name is Dr. Aaron M. Wilson Wright. And the title of his talk was with the same title that you see here, Rethinking the Relationship Between Egyptian and Semitic, the Lexical, Phonological, and Morphological Evidence, right? So he had claimed that he had done a linguistic analysis using the historical comparative method, and he came to a particular conclusion that was consistent with what we have discovered in the African school, right? So I was very interested in that article, in that perspective. And so it finally came out, right? A number of years later, 5 years later. And so what I found interesting about the text, again, it's multiple scholars. So you don't need to read like straight through. Each chapter is their own individual chapter. And so these were the scholars who came here, came to Austin, I believe, Austin, Texas, and gave their insight into their particular area of expertise. But what is consistent that I'm finding is that there's language through many of the chapters where they are unsure of the validity of Afro-Asiatic. But there are also scholars in here who claim, for example, that it is in fact, a legit language grouping. And so, like I said, you have contrasting views in this text. So depending on what perspective you agree on, this text is going to have a variety. But overall, they're essentially trying to justify the existence of Afro-Asiatic. But they for those who are trained in historical comparative linguistics, in examining their so-called evidence for it, it doesn't support that claim. And so this, in order to prove that to y'all, it would require a very detailed and scientific analysis of each one of these particular chapters, which we don't have time for, and which you would really have to kind of again, understand language and linguistics, and you would just need to really kind of write it out. So you would have to write a book, or at least an article for each articles. Again, it's not a simple text that is you read straight through. I mean, you can, but it's not one continuous argument. It's several different arguments in this particular text. But just to give you an example of something that I didn't put in the text, in the slides that we're going to go to. So this is very interesting, this issue which I'm about to go into here, because in one of the rejections to one of my journal articles, again, they could never examine the actual correspondences. They are upset that I'm using Bantu to make my arguments. And so one of the reviewers said that, why don't you use Chadic? And for example, the Hausa language. So Hausa is a language out in Nigeria, one of the largest languages in Nigeria. So, but it's interesting because, again, for those who have been following me over the years and the debates that we be having with folks who just be Google searching and don't understand the field and the controversies that emerge in the deeper stuff in the books that cost $135 and more to get the information. They think there's a consensus, regarding this language family, and don't know that there's internal conflicts that have major implications on the validity of a lot of these claims. So, for example, the chapter that I'm referring to right here is by Leo Deput, and it is titled "In Pascal's and Boole's Footsteps: Measuring the Mathematical Probability of Genetic Kinship Between Language Families, with a note on Chadic." Now, overall, I think this chapter is BS because he doesn't, again, this book, I swear that Afrikaans linguists are allergic to the comparative method. They go all out of their way to avoid the comparative method. And this book here proves that once again. And so this guy's trying to use all kinds of fancy mathematical models to try to prove uh, the existence of Afro-Asiatic, but he can't, for some reason, actually do any comparative work, which is the only proven way to make inferences on relatedness regarding languages. But what's interesting about this thing is that not only is he trying to establish Afro-Asiatic as a legit language, he also is making the argument that Chadic is not Afro-Asiatic. So he says, for example, on page 321, genetic relationship between Egyptian and Semitic is widely, if not universally accepted, which is interesting because this is one of the things that I mean. In a previous chapter, the argument is that Semitic and Egyptian are not related, genetically related. So you're going to see opposite views here. And so further down, he says a subsidiary aim of the present contribution is making just one more attempt at putting to rest once and for all the hypothesis that there is any evidence at all that shows that Chadic is Afro-Asiatic. Strangely, everyone now seems to believe that there is such evidence, whereas up to about 40, 50 years ago, no one did. What happened? So if there is even a debate on whether Chadic is an Afro-Asiatic family, why would and then as up as in 2023, there's scholars arguing that it is not part of the Afro-Asiatic family, then why would you dismiss the Bantu correlations and then suggest Hausa, a Chadic language, which according to Afrikaners is not even an Afro-Asiatic language? So you got to understand the battles that we go through. There's certain things are political. So if you don't see certain things in certain areas, that's because there's politics involved. And again, Afrikaners aren't scientists of any kind, and they don't know how to do the comparative method. So you get these contradictory arguments all of the time. So with that said, I'm going to go into details. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're just going to do the entire screen there. Right. So let's make this full screen. All right. And let's go all the way. Let's delete that. And let's just start from the beginning. All right. Let me exit full screen here. So hopefully I can see well, I won't be paying too much attention to the chat, but I'll try to look as best as possible to see if there's any noteworthy comments or questions as I am making this analysis here, right? So excuse me as I take a squig of some green tea citrus from Lipton. And they are not paying me for that comment or that endorsement. So here we go. Right. So it's always interesting, first and foremost, that when African scholars have made proposals, and these are the best university trained scholars that we know of, and there's many in our community who want to dismiss them. But you have European scholars, for example, like D. Dalby, who writes, we will also have to wait for the very speakers of these languages who have become linguists to attack comparative linguistics in order to elucidate the relationships of multiple languages, neighboring and related or not. So even at least this European scholar understands that there's going to be a limitation to what they're going to be able to do if they're not born speakers of these particular languages, and that we have to wait on the African scholars to learn about historical comparative linguistics and to see what they're able to come up with. And so this has been happening again since the 60s, the 50s and the 60s to be exact. And when they do not agree with how the Afrikaners have grouped and labeled, you have certain people who want to just dismiss them and only wait for Europeans to agree or come up with something and just totally dismiss the African scholars, while they themselves are saying that we have to wait on the African scholars to fully give us insights into these language categorizations and the like. And so this is a very interesting conversation nonetheless. So this is a proposed map of Afro-Asiatic, right? And in this particular map, they're trying to argue that Afro-Asiatic originated in what is now the Levant or Mesopotamia, in that area, and then the lower part at least, and then spread into Africa, via this route. So this is just one argumentation here, right? And I have screenshotted a conversation from, what year was this? I think this was in like 2020 or 2021, right? And it's a group called, it's a Facebook group called Anatolian Languages and Linguistics. And I made some comparisons between for example, Bantu and Collagen language with Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European. And, there have been several scholars before me who have argued that there is evidence that, the Indo-European languages ultimately derive from African languages, right? Including, G.J.K. Campbell-Dunn. Even Mboli has done a preliminary analysis and come to discover this to be true as well. And so, me, I put my hat in the ring, and I have found consistent, like, this is the case. And so, of course, I like to present preliminary comparisons between these languages. And so when I did that in this group, of course, there are those who are trying to dismiss the argument because they have in their mind that it's impossible for Indo-European to be related to African languages. So you can see at the top here, I don't know if y'all can really read it, but it says, please look at the existing Proto-Bantu reconstructions to see that all these correspondences are due to chance. Obviously, this person doesn't know about historical comparative linguistics. I made sure that there was enough there that they could not have been due to chance, right? And so I replied to him, I say, greetings, Michael Schultz. We have to keep in mind, let me blow it up a little bit. We have to keep in mind that in historical comparative linguistics, all that matters is the regularity of sound meaning correspondences. The comparative method is designed to eliminate chance as an explanation for the pattern. And then Seymour added some more stuff, right? So he comes back under me, he says, a major problem is that Bantu is a subfamily of a subfamily of a subfamily of Niger Congo. Suppose your conclusion is correct. How to integrate Indo-European into Niger-Congo, which reaches much deeper into the past? And then I reply to him, there is no such thing as a Niger-Congo phylum. If there is, can you please show me any text where Niger-Congo has been confirmed via the comparative method? The same for Afro-Asiatic, Khoisan, or Nilo-Saharan. Can you show me valid reconstructions for Niger-Congo that can confirm the alleged subdivision of the phylum? So this is his response to my question is very important. He says, I am one of those Africanists who strongly believe, he said the word believe, that there will be such reconstructions in the future. In my opinion, there must be bottom-up reconstructions of smaller subfamilies, and this will take much time. But I am confident that we will be successful. Now, if you don't understand his reply, let me explain this to you. He just said that we don't have the evidence for Niger-Congo, but I believe that we will in the future if we just keep working at it. In other words, the whole Greenbergian family list of families is essentially the Christianity of comparative linguistics, right? They're the creationist of comparative linguistics, meaning that they have faith. They without any, remember that faith is the what's the biblical definition of faith? It's the kind of the belief in the unseen, the evidence of things not seen, right? They're hoping and praying that Niger-Congo and Afro-Asiatic and all of this are legit. But they have no evidence for such a claim. And so this is just an example of, one of those issues. So problems in the methodology. So here is Karl Meinhof. He was a Prussian pastor influenced by August Schlecher, 1899, dealing with Bantu languages and the like, right? Now, I don't know if he's the originator, and thank you, Keisha. She says the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. Exactly. So I'm not sure if he's the one who introduced, but he was definitely one of those proponents of the Hamitic hypothesis, right? So in 1912, I'm just giving some highlights because this text is written in German. He says the Hamitic group, which possesses the grammatical gender, which he believes is superior linguistic fact, and which would have been spoken by Hamites, a mysterious non-Black population, if not to be white, which would have been at the origin of the lesser phenomena of civilizations in Africa, from the ruins of Zimbabwe to the statues of Ife. So Zimbabwe and Ile Ife and all of that, that's the result of in ancient Egypt, and as well as a result of these migrating Hamites coming from Asia. So that's why I showed you that map at the beginning, right? He says the Sudanese group characterized by the absence of grammatical gender and an isolating typology, in which would be the language of the real Blacks, the Negroes. So our true languages are the ones that don't have gender markers, right? So that's the true Negroes. And then finally, the Bantu group with the agglutinative morphology with its nominal class system will be closer to the primitive state of the Hamitic group, right? And so it's you have to, we have to do the whole Hamitic hypothesis as a separate conversation, but you see that anything that is of note in Africa, they try to blame it on these migrating Hamites coming from Asia, right? And so even Greenberg at one point had this hypothesis. So what you see here is the language phylums that Joseph Greenberg, who was an anthropologist and not a studied linguist, created. So he created Nilo-Saharan, which you see in the yellow, and then Niger-Congo is now broken up into two: Niger-Congo A and Niger-Congo B. B being the Bantu, and then Niger-Congo A, which would include Yoruba, Igbo, and Fulani. Khoisan, which is in the green, that little pocket in the southwestern part, and then of course in the blue, Afro-Asiatic, right, which includes Hausa, Songhai, Berber, Arabic, Amharic. I don't know if Songhai is, no, that's Nilo-Saharan. So yeah, but Hausa in the blue, Amharic, Oromo, Arabic, Berber, etc., includes some of the languages included in the Afro-Asiatic, right? And in a text, Language, Culture, and Communication, he says Afro-Asiatic languages are spoken by Caucasian and Negro peoples. The Cushites and the Ethiopian Semites are often classified as Caucasoid. The Egyptians, Berbers, and the remaining Semitic people are indisputably Caucasian, while the Chad speakers are Negroid. On this evidence, it seems probable that Afro-Asiatic languages were originally spoken by Caucasians and in some instances taken over by Negroes. So you got to understand the mentality of these particular earlier speakers and the arguments they are trying to make. So these are non-linguistic arguments, right? And keep in mind that to Joseph Greenberg's credit, he had, since that publication, altered his thinking. And so, but you can tell at the early stages that the mindset that went into partially the groupings that you find in these African languages. So this is an interesting comment from this author here, Jean-Léonce Denis, and translating into English, he states, when we reread the most striking works of the great Africanists from the beginning of the 20th century, we are struck by a really massive fact, is that they almost never explain their theoretical support. They probably do not do applied linguistics in the sense that we hear this word today, but they are no more theorists and fundamentalists than one would find at the origin of new scientific hypotheses, right? So he's showing that the 20th century, that's the 1900s. So I was born in the 20th century, 1979. So those 20th century folks, is that they almost, and they're not talking about African scholars, because they only talk about white scholars, is that they almost never explain their theoretical support, right? And so the book is on the history of African linguistics. So we're talking about African language folks. So all of these early folks who are doing these categorizations of African languages, they almost never explain their theoretical support, right? So keep that in mind as we're having this conversation. And so, here's a good linguist, and I always recommend this book. It should be in its 4th edition right now. It's called Historical Linguistics: An Introduction by Dr. Lyle Campbell. And, chapter 13.1 is the chapter that prepares you how to analyze and examine these large claims for these phylums and the like. And so I just wanted to put that there as a resource for y'all to kind of read on your own, right? But let's go to the Handbook of Comparative and Historical Indo-European Linguistics, right? So they have chapter 12. They're talking about the comparative method in African linguistics. So let's go through this. And keep in mind, I have many citations that we just don't have time for today to go over all this. So I'm just picking a few. A good number of them I put in Umoja Volume 2, Chapter 9. And so if you want to review some more. But in this text here, he says, in this study of African languages, historical linguistics played a most important role already before African linguistics became established as a discipline in its own right. An endless number of studies on African language relationship, on studies on language relationship and language classification have since been published, and several attempts were made at reconstructing the history of African language phyla and families. Until the mid 20th century, however, by far the majority of such contributions were based on mixed criteria: economic, cultural, physical, anthropological, and linguistic. But even if purely linguistic criteria were applied, no dividing line was drawn, as a rule, between genetic and typological criteria. And so this situation changed with the publication of a series of articles by Joseph Greenberg on African linguistic classification between 1949 and 1950, a revised version of which appeared later on as a monograph entitled The Languages of Africa. In this famous book, the author provided a, in quotations, complete genetic classification that distinguishes 4 genetic phyla, each containing a number of families and subfamilies. It is this taxonomy that in subsequent years was used most frequently by other scholars as a point of departure for new attempts at classifying African language groups. However, although Greenberg made exclusive use of the word genetic linguistic criteria, and in spite of the enormous impact of his investigation on follow-up studies, his classification was not, and you can see that word not is italicized, and based on the comparative method, but on an approach that Greenberg himself had called mass comparison, and that other scholars refer to as the method of resemblances. For a harsh critique of this method, see Fodor 1982. In fact, systematic application of the comparative method has been relatively rare to this day in African linguistics, as will be shown in this section. For reasons of economy, the discussion will largely be restricted to some general problems inherent in the employment of the comparative method in an African context, right? So you can see here that the comparative method has rarely been applied to languages in Africa. Now, he puts on, the author of this chapter puts on some other criteria that just turned out not to be true on why you can't apply the comparative method to African languages. But he clearly states here that when it comes to Greenberg and his classifications, the comparative method was never applied. That's why he made up this so-called mass comparison method, and scholars have been having issues with this since he began this series of studies. And so it's interesting that when people try to argue with me about Afro-Asiatic or any of these other kinds of phylums that were created by Greenberg, they're not hip to the actual scholarship around this. And I'm going to keep re-emphasizing this because as early as 1986, right? Lopriano, page 188, and this is translated from the German, right? I'm talking about the verbal system of Egyptian. And I know the aspect there, but I forgot what Grundolegunier, I can't pronounce that, means, right? So he says, regarding Afroasiatic in particular, in view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of the Hamido-Semitic languages goes beyond what is scientifically attainable. So y'all hear that? In view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of the Hamido-Semitic, aka Afro-Asiatic languages, goes beyond what is scientifically attainable, even in the sense of an algebraic reconstruction. Our comparisons will therefore have to renounce the traditional historical model of diachronic linguistics and instead will extend the typological approach. Here, the overlappings need not necessarily go back to a posited common Afro-Asiatic, but will rather represent Afro-Asiatic as a realized construct. Thus, Afro-Asiatic will never be a reconstructible language, but only the independent, but only the reconstructed sum of historically attested points of linguistic juncture independent of their origin and carried out for the sake of a particular investigation. This sum may be interpreted in terms of genetic relationships, Sprachbund, areal linguistics, or allogenetic relationship. The results of allogenetic contacts between Afroasiatic languages will also have to be considered as belonging to the structure of Afroasiatic, just as much as are the results of genetic relationship. Afroasiatic can only be considered an abstract construct of linguistic features and not a unified system of linguistic realities. Right? So he's saying here that it is not a genetic unit. It is in terms of reconstructing or doing comparative analysis beyond is what is scientifically attainable. So you can't establish Afroasiatic scientifically. It is only a grouping of languages that share similar typological features. And for those of you who are familiar with historical linguistics, you know that a genetic relationship cannot be established by typological similarities. So an example of a typological similarity that may resonate with you all. So it would assume, for example, if we gathered everybody who is listening to this program live, and we put all of the people who are under 5'5" on the left-hand side of the room, and then everyone who is above 5'5" on the right-hand side of the room. And we just made this arbitrary analysis that everybody on the left-hand side of the room, because they are under 5'5", are genetically related. They're close cousins and brothers and sisters. And everybody who was on the right-hand side of the room who are over 5'5" are genetically related. They're brothers and sisters and close relatives. Now, we know that that would be insane. And that's not how you determine genetic relationship, right? Like if I just randomly saw another brother who is over 5'5" and an older gentleman, that somehow that means he is my father, right? Because we're both over 5'5". That's not how genetic relationships work. Matter of fact, it has nothing to do with genes at all, right? So this methodology is essentially what they've done with the classifications of African languages using the Greenberg model, right? So Paul Newman, in this book called The Introduction to African Languages, specifically states, now keep in mind, they all believe in Afro-Asiatic, but they make statements like this: language classification must be based on specific points of resemblance and not on the presence or absence of general features of a typological nature. So let's go back. If Lopriano here is saying that the results of an allogenetic context between Afroasiatic languages will also have to be considered as belonging to the structure of Afroasiatic, just as much as are the results of genetic relationship. Afroasiatic can only be considered an abstract construct of linguistic features and not a unified system of linguistic realities. He stated up above here that Afro-Asiatic will never be a reconstructible language, but only the reconstructed sum of a historically attested points of linguistic juncture independent of origin. He's talking about typology here. And that's why he said, our comparisons will therefore have to renounce the traditional historical model of diachronic linguistics. In other words, historical comparative linguistics, and instead will extend a typological approach. So he says that we're going to have to just, if Afro-Asiatic is real, it just has to be based on typology. But here comes Paul Newman. Language classification must be based on specific points of resemblance and not on the presence or absence of general features of a typological nature. You see the contradictions going on here? Thus, whether two or more languages are tonal or not, whether they have an odd number versus an even number of vowels, might be interesting from a typological or areal point of view, but in and of itself is irrelevant in determining relatedness. Right? So this is the issue that we're having here. So this is one of the reasons why Afro-Asiatic will never be a realized construct, because they're trying to group these languages based on typological features, which you cannot use in historical comparative linguistics, only through a genetic way of doing things, right? So RM, his name is Robert M.W. Dixon. He wrote a text in 97 called The Rise and Fall of Languages. And in this, on page 35, he says, for many linguists, such views pertaining to Greenberg's method and his Eurasiatic superphylum fall more into the category of religious beliefs than scientifically testable hypotheses, about on par with the claims that all languages have the same underlying deep structure and the position of the stars at the moment of our birth determines our character. So he's sitting here saying essentially that Greenberg's methods and the Africanists are doing pseudoscience. They're doing astrology. They're doing the astrology of linguistics. And notice that he says here that for many linguists, such views in regards to Greenberg's methods fall more into the category of religious beliefs. So remember, let's go back to this. So remember when I confronted that scholar on the validity of Niger Congo, which is, of course, is the construct of Greenberg in his school. He says, I am one of those Africanists, so he admits he's an Africanist, who strongly believe that there will be such reconstructions in the future. In my opinion, there must be a bottom-up reconstructions of smaller subfamilies, and this will take much time. But I am confident that we will be successful. This is a religious belief. Anybody who adheres to Niger Congo, Afro-Asiatic, Khoisan, or Nilo-Saharan are creationists. They're Muslims. They're Christians. They're religious folks. They're relying on faith and not science. That's why in Lopriano's analysis here, he says, in view of the present state of research, a comparative grammar of the Hamido-Semitic languages goes beyond what is scientifically attainable. Your own. So when if it's not scientifically attainable, all you can do is go by faith and religious beliefs. So they might as well wait for Jesus to come and tell them that Afro-Asiatic and Niger Congo are legit language families, right? So he says there is no reputable historical linguist anywhere in the world who accepts the claims of Greenberg and an Nostradist, right? Now, keep in mind that Nostrotic is another one of Greenberg's creations, and he includes Afro-Asiatic in Nostrotic language, which includes Indo-European and some other Asian languages. Right? So I'm telling you that when it comes to the Greenberg's method, it's pseudoscience. It's not historical comparative linguistics. So when you try to submit papers to journals and the like using the actual historical comparative method, they don't know how to react. They don't know what to do with it because they don't know how to do it. And you're trying to, it's equivalent to you trying to introduce scientific fossils, DNA evidence on the origin of humanity and time periods and all this other kind of stuff and talk about evolution. And then here come the creationists talking about, no, it was Yahweh and the earth is only 6,000 years old, right? So this is why I call them the creationists of linguistics in terms of the Greenberg school. So there's an article that was published in 2008 titled "The Future of Prehistoric Comparative Linguistics." And it's talking about a review of Guthrie's comparative Bantu methodology with insights from recent relevant literature on comparative linguistics, language change, and restructuring the genetic links and suggestions toward contemporary applications, right? So in yellow is what is stated in the text. He says, clearly there is great scope for variation in interpretation and vigorous debate in this final stage. It may well be possible to achieve correct analysis using defective methodology. So while increasing numbers have criticized Greenberg's methodology, many linguists surprisingly still accept his classifications and are now seeking to find a better basis for them. So in other words, they come to their conclusion and then try to look for evidence to substantiate their conclusion. This is why they are the creationists of linguistics, because creationists have a conclusion and now they're trying to look for everything to justify everything that happened in the Bible or the claims of the Bible. And that is unscientific. You don't do that. You have a hypothesis, and then you do the scientific work. And if the hypothesis is not supported by the evidence, by the experiments, you abandon and or restructure. You do not hold on and try to make the hypothesis fact when the evidence does not support such a thing. Right? So it is religious belief. They're holding on to Jesus died on the cross and created Afro-Asiatic. That's essentially what they're doing. And, you know, this is from a previous conversation. And so I put in here, who is criticizing Greenberg's classification? Is it only Afrocentrist? Is the author assuming that it is Black Afrocentric scholars who are now seeking to find a better basis for them, Greenberg's classification? Why would they need to seek a better basis for them? Why not just abandon them and start over from scratch? Wouldn't that be the best thing given the faultiness of this classification? Africanist linguists are the creationists of linguistics. They have a belief in an idea first, then find evidence to support their belief. Right? Because if you listen to the YouTube scholars, they'll swear up and down that these Afrocentric folks are just making up these claims and that the consensus, you know, supports Niger Congo, Afro-Asiatic, and all that. This is why you can't link genetics to languages, especially the languages of Africa, because one, you know, bones don't have writing on them, and there's no DNA sequence that you can discover that's going to tell you what language a person that those bones or those people spoke, right? And given that Afro-Asiatic is made up in terms of is not scientifically valid, it is a belief system. It doesn't exist. You can't link actual DNA to a language phylum that does not exist in reality and never existed. And you can't justify its existence at all. So you just turn any kind of connections into um, a Marvel movie, right? So Lyle Campbell, the Handbook on Historical Linguistics, he has an article in there titled "How to Show Languages Are Related: Methods for Distant Genetic Relationship," right? And I'm just going to pose. I'm not going to read all of this. So when you come back and visit, you can read this on your own. But the point of me showing this here is that, you know, when you engage in a lot of these Afrikaans linguists and you show relationships between, for example, Bantu and Egyptian, or Wolof and Egyptian, or Yoruba and Egyptian, they'll try to say, well, these words don't look alike, so we can't accept these as valid correspondences. Again, they don't know how to do historical comparative linguistics, because the more dissimilar they are, the stronger the evidence that they are genetically related. All that matters is the regularity of the sound meaning correspondences. As long as you can establish a solid and consistent pattern between the languages, you're set. But if you're looking for lookalikes like Greenberg, your whole analysis will be wrong. As we say in computer science, trash in, trash out. All right, but I'm not going to read all that. Y'all can read that on your own. So another text is called Aerial Diffusion and Genetic Inheritance, Problems in Comparative Linguistics, edited by Alexandra Y. Ockenwald, which is on the left, and Robert M. W. Dixon, who is on the right. And there's an article in here by Bernheim and Tania Kuteva called Convergence and Divergence in the Development of African Languages. It states, the most easily accessible way of describing the historical relationship of these languages is by reconstructing their genetic relationship patterns. The multitude of African languages can be reduced to 4 genetically defined units called families by Greenberg and phyla by others. These units are Niger-Congo, Niger-Kordofanian, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. There are various methods available to the linguist for historical reconstruction. The task of the linguist is to choose that method that appears to be best suited to solve a particular problem. Which method is most suitable in a given situation depends primarily on the time factor involved. Historical processes that happen within the last century require different methods of analysis from processes dating back 1,002 years ago. Most of the work to establish language phyla in Africa, including that of Greenberg, has used the method of resemblances, which is based on the assumption that in order to establish that 2 or more languages are genetically related, or to determine the degree to which they are related, one simply needs to demonstrate that these languages share a sufficient number of lexicon items that are similar in form and meaning. The main problems associated with this method concern the question of how the notions of sufficient number and similarity in form and meaning can be defined. So this is cited here just to show you, again, another citation that Greenberg used a method of mass comparison, which is also called, the method of resemblances. In other words, lookership. On account of such problems, many students of African linguistics consider this method to be of doubtful value, and some would reject it altogether, arguing that reliable reconstructions of genetic relationship patterns can only be achieved by means of the comparative method. According to Nichols, this method works reliably only up to the time depth of roughly 8,000 years. So far, it has not been possible to apply the comparative method appropriately to any of the 4 language phyla. Right? So it's you if once you start applying the comparative method to these so-called language phyla, it collapses. And you're going to see this in the citation from the Ancient Egyptian and Afro-Asiatic Rethinking the Origins book. I'm setting up something here, right? So another article in this text is discussing this is from the introduction of the text. So the editors state, discussing work on African languages, Dixon states, after reviewing the available literature, an outsider is forced to conclude that the idea of genetic relationship and the term language family are used in quite different ways by Africanists and by scholars working on languages from the other parts of the world. Both Dimmendahl in chapter 13 and Heine Kuteva in chapter 14 present the receiving opinion that there are in Africa 4 major language families or genetically defined units: Niger-Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. In fact, Khoisan is regarded by those scholars who have studied it in most detail as a linguistic area consisting of several distinct genetic families. Afro-Asiatic does appear to be one genetic unit, although full justification for this has yet to be published in integrated form. There are wide divergences of opinion concerning the status of Nilo-Saharan. For Niger-Congo, all we can say is that there has so far been no principled justification for this as a language family, as Dimmendahl states in his section 3, by the criteria of regular sound correspondences among these languages and of the reconstruction of protoforms, Niger-Congo is not a proven genetic unity. It may well be that, as Heine Kuteva say, Greenberg's genetic classification of African languages is by now widely accepted. But being widely accepted, for example, amongst Africanists, does not equate with has been scientifically justified. And I put this here, of course, on purpose, but to inform all of the folks who are not familiar with how science works. You will always see these YouTubers who don't study science seriously, who don't do science, who don't write, who don't submit papers to conferences and for it to be scrutinized by other scholars and the like, who don't know how to do this stuff. They're always fall back on this mythological thing called consensus. And all the consensus is an acceptance of a particular opinion. It's popular opinion. But popular opinion, or what is being widely accepted, does not equate to has been scientifically justified. So this is why you can't take a lot of these folks seriously. They don't know the difference between if something has been scientifically justified versus a whole bunch of people holding a popular opinion. And this is why we can't have conversations, serious ones, with these detractors, because they just don't know. They don't have the skill set to be able to scientifically justify the arguments. All they can do is lean upon the experts because they're not an expert. There's a vast difference between popular opinion, consensus, widely accepted, versus scientifically justified. And for this channel, for all of you who are listening, I expect you to always lean on the side of scientifically justified. Always ask for the process and the justification. What are the methods of the field, and have they followed the methods? So notice that when I cited these other scholars, no one outside of these Africanists agree with Greenberg's methods and their school. There's linguists across the world who adhere to the comparative method. And then here come these folks. They're fringe. They're astrologists. But when the Africans, the Teofalobingas, the Mbolis, the Oscar Perfumas, the asarimhoteps, etc., apply the comparative method, the method that is used across the world to these languages, they want to dismiss it and 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 hold on to the astrology of linguistics, Greenberg and his school. It's amazing, right? He says, at the end of section 1, we quoted Dench's methodological principle that only after all possible explanations for the shared features have been exhausted should they be taken to be a genetic inheritance. And I'm gonna pause here because this is what we do in science. You have a variety of hypotheses. The scientific method is about hypothesis falsification. The objective is to falsify the hypotheses. If you cannot falsify the hypothesis, you are on more solid grounds for establishing the hypothesis being a valid explanation about reality. And so that in order for you to do that, you have to eliminate other hypotheses. And that's exactly what he's talking about here. It's a scientific approach. The opposite procedure appears to have been followed by Africanists. They do the opposite. They just go with their first mind. At a first stage, every sort of resemblance was taken as indicative of a genetic connection. Many of these are, in fact, typological or areal similarities. And remember what we read earlier, you cannot establish a genetic relationship based upon typological criteria. Right. So now let me hand me out. So this is another article in the text. It's called Proto-Semitic and Egyptian. Now I want y'all to listen to this story, right? Now I think this is one who overall he still has a belief system, right? So let's do this. He says, I studied. I can't even speak today. I studied Middle Egyptian for several years. Matter of fact, I didn't put the author's name. I do apologize to each and every one of you. Let me open the book real quick and get that name for you. So his name is John Hunegard, if I'm even saying that correctly. It's chapter 5, starting on page 139, right? So John Hunegard, and the chapter is called Proto-Semitic and Egyptian. So he says, I studied Middle Egyptian for several years in graduate school, and I have even taught it a few times in graduate seminars. But obviously, I am far from being an expert in Egyptian grammar. Quite early in my teaching career, I also studied some Berber and Cushitic, hoping to gain a better understanding of early Semitic through a better understanding of its genetic siblings. But I ultimately grew frustrated in that enterprise. The dearth or the quality of clear cognate sets made it difficult to apply the comparative method, either to reconstruct much of earlier ancestral Afroasiatic with any confidence, or to sort out the interrelationships of its alleged descendant branches. And no approach other than the standard comparative method can achieve reliable results toward those goals. Let me re-emphasize this, right? And no approach other than the standard comparative method can achieve reliable results towards those goals. Continue. My frustration in working on Afroasiatic was brought into sharp focus one semester 25 or 30 years ago. So let's take the bigger number. So 30 years ago, that's 1993. When my late Harvard colleague, Calvert Watkins, the eminent Indo-Europeanist, asked me to present the status quo on Afroasiatic to his graduate seminar on historical linguistics. At the end of my 2 or 3 hour presentation, let me pause this real quick because I want to highlight this. Let me do this real quick because I forgot to highlight it. And he says, and I believe he was right. Let me do that now. So let's go back from the current slide. So let me do this. Right. So let me read this, right? So what he's saying is that, 30 years ago, a colleague of his, from a Harvard colleague of his, Calvert Watkins, asked him to do a presentation for his graduate seminar. And so the lecture was 2 or 3 hours. And his colleague, Dr. Watkins, responded, "So, not really an established family then." Did y'all get that? He's presenting the author John Hunegard is presenting, trying to justify Afro-Asiatic. This is 1993, right? The same year that Theophilo Benga came out with his text dismantling Afro-Asiatic and showing the relationship between ancient Egyptian and Bantu via his Mbochi, his native Mbochi language, right? So after that 2 or 3 hour lecture, his colleague who asked him to do the lecture responds, "So Afro-Asiatic's not really an established family then." And he responds, and I believe he was right, in the sense that there was still a long way to go to elicit significant numbers of plausible cognate sets across the branches and to formulate consistent sound correspondences on the basis of these cognates, the most fundamental goals of the comparative method. And I also believe that it is still true today. You notice this pattern we're seeing, where everybody's of the belief that one day we're going to discover the Holy Grail, that we're going to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And we're going to discover the proof that Afro-Asiatic language phylum exists as a reality. So I showed you all those other commentaries from older. So when people try to say that, those were older texts. This book came out last month. This is 2023. And in 2023, this person has the faith of a Christian that Jesus is going to come back and save us. In this instance, to save the hypothesis of Afro-Asiatic. All right. So let me read, because I think this is just some extra stuff. So he's still trying to hold on. So he says, what is needed still is a reconstruction of the earlier stages of the other branches of Afro-Asiatic besides Egyptian and Semitic. If, for example, Cushitic languages constitute a family, and if they are related to the Semitic languages, the comparanda must be Proto-Cushitic and Proto-Semitic. It is not acceptable to compare a form in a particular Cushitic language with a possibly similar form in a particular Semitic language. We are dealing with an enormous time depth, and the chance of accidental similarity is simply too great. Likewise, if there is a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Semitic, it must be because they descend separately from an ancestor that predates both of them. Egyptian is patently much more different from any Semitic language than any one of those is to another. Even languages is different and is widely separated in time, as Old Akkadian and Maltese. So now we're going to get into the text by Aaron M. Wilson Wright, the one who got me interested in the conference, which unfortunately I was unable to attend and the book that we are examining now. And so, I won't go into the details of his evidence, and I have a problem with him trying to make the argument based on these reconstructions. But let's go to his conclusion in regards to the relationship between Semitic and ancient Egyptian. So this is just a kind of a screenshot from the, a photo that I took of the book itself, but I typed it all out here. So his conclusion, 7.4, I guess it's chapter 7. He says, in this chapter, I have undertaken a systematic comparison of reconstructed Egyptian and Proto-Semitic lexicon, phonology, and morphology in order to test the genetic relationship between these two language families. According to my analysis, Egyptian and Semitic do not share enough lexical material to establish systematic sound correspondences between them. And even more seriously, the number of lexical items they do share is lower than what we would expect from chance alone. Furthermore, the two language families share only 3 morphemes in common. The third person masculine singular stative ending A, the first person singular, I forgot what that C stands for, stative ending nu, and the feminine morpheme at. But these forms are short and consist of common unmarked phonemes, which increases the odds of chance resemblances. The remaining features either diverge or are impossible to compare profitably due to the limits of internal reconstruction in either Egyptian or Semitic. The difference between the forms we can reconstruct does not inspire confidence in the underlying similarity between the unreconstructable forms. For these reasons, I would argue that there is insufficient evidence to posit a genetic relationship between Egyptian and Proto-Semitic, and we should therefore refrain from using Semitic data for reconstructing Egyptian or vice versa. Future advances in internal reconstruction may supply more evidence in favor of such a relationship, but for the time being, it is best to proceed as if Egyptian and Proto-Semitic were unrelated. This conclusion, in turn, has consequences for the study of Afro-Asiatic. If Egyptian and Semitic are not genetically related, then only one of them can belong to the Afro-Asiatic phylum, if indeed such a language family exists. So he even questions the whole validity of Afro-Asiatic. And people don't understand what the larger implications of this means. Because Semitic is the only language that was born outside of the continent of Africa that only has come into Africa in recent times in the form of Arabic, and then earlier in the East African through Yemen, through travels there, right? So Semitic is not related to Egyptian, which means that Christopher Ehret's hypothesis that Berber, Egyptian, and Semitic descend from a common ancestor that split into those 3 languages. So he's saying that if Semitic and Egyptian are not genetically related, only one of them can be Afro-Asiatic. And so it's telling you essentially that Afro-Asiatic doesn't exist, which is why he says at the end, if indeed such a language family exists. So we got to understand the state of the art here. So remember what I read earlier from the same text, that Chadic languages aren't Afro-Asiatic. So remember what Afro-Asiatic is supposed to consist of: Berber, Ancient Egyptian, which is its own family, Semitic languages, Cushitic, and I said Chadic, Cushitic, and Omotic. So Semitic ain't related to those. You can't do any comparative, which you can't do Semitic and Cushitic, or Semitic and Chadic. And so Semitic's gone, Chadic is gone. And if you can't establish a relationship between ancient Egyptian and Chadic, and you can't establish a relationship between ancient Egyptian and Semitic, the whole Afro-Asiatic hypothesis falls. But the African scholars been said this. Semitic languages are not African languages. And this also has another implication, because those Semitic speakers would have been if the ancient Egyptians are folks who came from the Middle East, they would have been speaking a Semitic language. They would either have been speaking a Semitic language or an Indo-European language. And ancient Egyptian is neither Semitic, is not related to Semitic, and is not directly related to Indo-European. So this lets you know, just as all the other evidence says, that the Egyptians came from the South. And since we can establish the relationship between Bantu and Wolof and Yoruba and Collagen and Acholi, this is why the Obenga had to create the Negro Egyptian, and Mboli came and refined the model that Teofilo Obenga created, because the Greenberg method of the phylums that they created are unscientific. You can't justify them in any way. Each new argument they have crumbles once you apply the scientific method to it. And so, this relationship, this has been known. So even when you read Sir Alan Gardner's Egyptian grammar, right? He says, despite resemblances of Semitic languages, ancient Egyptian differs from all the Semitic tongues a good deal more than anyone differs from each other. And at least until its relationship to the African languages is more closely defined, ancient Egyptian must certainly be classified as standing outside of the Semitic group. Because you had some folks trying to argue that Egyptian and Semitic were close, or Egyptian derives from Semitic languages. Is not the case. There's only similarity because they have been living side by side for a number of thousands of years. And so there was intermarriage and all this, and so they shared linguistic features over time. This confuses those, of course, who do chance similarities, chance resemblances to establish genetic families. But under the scrutiny of the comparative method, which eliminates chance from the data set, it is clear that they're nowhere near related. And the African scholars have been saying this since time immemorial. And so it's when we can do stuff like this, for example, this is what they avoid. You would never, ever, ever in your life see an Africanist make live comparisons such as what I'm showing here. And what I was looking for, and why the show started so late, is because I thought I marked it, Paige, but I haven't found it. But I'll find it, and maybe I'll set it up for another discussion. But another author in the same book talks about when they try to apply the comparative method to Afro-Asiatic, they couldn't find more than 10. The exact wording was 5 to 10 examples between those languages that one could argue is a strong comparison. But that's if you can only find 5 to 10, and I can do this easily with for example, the Chiluba Bantu language, the Collagen language. Remember, Chiluba is supposed to be Niger-Congo. Collagen is supposed to be Nilo-Saharan. And the Sumerian language is supposed to be not related to any language. And I can find more than 5 to 10. So let's just deal with these 5 here. And hopefully I made it wide enough so that y'all can see. But if y'all disagree with any of my comparisons, let me know in the comments. because we can go through this each row by row, column by column. So Egyptian, chisi, to spin yarn. Ingeshi, ingezi, basketry, van, winnower, to think, discern, and sorts, right? Collagen, kiss, small, serving basket, in noun form. Sir, to spin, to twist, to slither, in Sumerian. And so in the Egyptian example, what is, for the rest of them, the initial K sound, it was voiced to G, Geshi, Gezi, right? And so you see the dotted H in the first consonant position corresponds regularly to a velar sound, either the voice variant, and I have, these are just 5 that I chose. In the upcoming text, Race and Identity in Ancient Egyptian, there's like 20 or 30 examples that I give, but for the sake of time and space, I only chose these 5. Right, so you'll see more G and dotted H correspondences between Chiluba. But look at the consistency here. Hizi, praise one. Chasa, Sanka, be happy, be joyous, be content, to be happy, to rejoice. Kesa, right? To praise, to glorify, to encourage, glorify, give joy to. No correspondence in Sumerian. So the idea of praising one or to bring joy is in the same semantic field as we can see with these comparisons. Ches, to be tied up, closed. Hisu, in noun form, part of a fishnet, which you tie up and close, you tie rope. Chesed, to be closed by a cord. Chesar, thread, cord, string. Koshi, kunzi, kunji, rope, liana, thin or small. Quar, tie, bind, tie with a rope or an animal, rope, teether. And you can see the G and K interchange in the first consonant position in collagen. To plate, or a plate, and then to plate rope or fibers or baskets. Sir, to harness, to tie up, to suspend. Everything is consistent between these. So it is impossible for me to find these consistent correspondences between Egyptian, Chiluba, Collagen, and Sumerian. 4 different languages allegedly belong to 4 different families. This would be impossible. But this is why they shy away from the comparative method, because the comparative method shows that the Afro-Asiatic and Niger Congo and all of that does not exist, as I cited by people who adhere to Afro-Asiatic. So notice I didn't cite not one African Black author. These are all European Africanists who call it pseudoscience and state emphatically that, using the historical comparative method, we cannot justify any of Greenberg's language phylum. Right. And so I'll just end there. And I will entertain a few questions if you have it. In the meantime, if you haven't as of yet, I'm going to need each and every one of you to That is right. Hit the like button and make sure that you share this video with all your friends and colleagues, and even the enemies of this show who just hate when I drop science and have citations for your ass. I'm just bugging with y'all. And if you would like to support the channel, there's different ways in which you can support via the information at the bottom. So let me check with the Chat, I haven't been able to keep up all the time, so I'll have to go back up and visit it at a later time. So I'm pretty sure that there's some haters in the chat because I attract the haters. I'm not mad, but of course they're going to be in their feelings and they're going to try to come with some citations. Say here, Afro-Asiatic is legit, and it's like no, it's just not. At this point, we just got to give it up. Let me see. It says, we'll save this for Quora. Some people won't like that. Indeed. 42 Tribes says, what were the best and worst arguments in the book for and against Afro-Asiatic as a language grouping? There's how should I say? The problem is with this text here is that I don't know if you were here at the beginning, but I mentioned that Africanist linguists are allergic to the comparative method. This book, all the authors, Christopher Ehret is in here too, trying to justify Afro-Asiatic. So he's one of those people trying to justify. So remember, Christopher Ehret came out in 1995 with a book claiming to reconstruct Afro-Asiatic, which nobody takes seriously because it was just terrible. But the reason why that book falters, the reason why this one does as well, is that they never do the comparative method. That's the only way that you can establish and justify anything. So all the comparisons that they do here, they never establish, again, by the comparative methods. They're all trying to do these reconstructions, but they're not based on anything. I really don't know how to explain it to a layperson. Those who are familiar with historical comparative linguistics will understand what I'm saying, because there's a process that you got to go through. For example, if you're trying to argue that certain morphemes are shared between a group of languages, you first have to establish the sound meaning correspondences in all areas to show what sound in language A corresponds to a sound in language B, and in what positions, and in what conditions will the sounds change, in a particular type of environment, right? So then and only then can you now jump to morphology, because the morphemes that you're saying are related, they have to agree with the sound meaning correspondences, the sounds that you establish. So if, for example, if I was to say that the S sound corresponds to T in, the S sound in language A corresponds to T in language B. And then I'm saying that there's these two morphemes that exist in language A and language B. And in both languages, the morpheme that we're saying is they're connected. In language A, that morpheme begins with the S sound, but it also begins with an S sound in language B. Why is that a problem? Because, let's just assume that we are unable to establish that the S sound in language A has any other correspondences in language B. It only corresponds to T in language B. So if I see a grammatical morpheme in language B with an S sound and a morpheme in language A with the S sound, and they look similar and they behave similarly, I cannot argue that the morpheme in language B and the morpheme in language A are in fact evidence of a genetic unity. because I haven't established in my sound meaning correspondences these two sounds, correlate with each other between language A and language B. And this is exactly what they do. When you avoid the comparative method, you avoid that first step, which requires you to set up sound meaning correspondences between the lexemes, between the basic vocabulary and the like, between these languages. And damn near every last one of these articles do that, because they're trying to go around the comparative method. That's the whole point. They're totally avoiding it, because when they try to apply it, as I read in one of the other hold on, let me see if I can find it again. Let's see. Nope. Let me go. So, for example, let me share my screen again. All right. Entire screen. All right. So, hopefully y'all can see. Let me wait on this to see if y'all can see correctly. All right. So, and this is from the aerial diffusion text that I mentioned earlier, right? So he says, for Niger Congo, all we can say is that there has so far been no principal justification for this as a language family. As Demendal states, now Demendal believes in Afro-Asiatic, but he's stating here in his section 3, by the criteria of regular sound correspondences among these languages and of the reconstruction of protoforms, Niger Congo is not a proven genetic unit, right? And so, as far as Niger Congo is concerned, it falls because of the same reasons, right? Oh, my bad. I need to take off the hide that comment so y'all can see, right? So it's the regular sound correspondences, and let me see. So when we're dealing with Proto-Semitic and Egyptian, and I believe he was right. So remember, this is Dr. The Wright, who I mentioned earlier, whose article is in this text. So he says here, referring to his colleague again, so not really an established family, talking about Afro-Asiatic, and I believe he was right in the sense that there was still a long way to go to elicit significant numbers of plausible cognate sets across the branches and to formulate consistent sound correspondences on the basis of those cognates. The most fundamental goals of the comparative method. So that's what it is. None of them apply. There's only one article in this text that attempts on some level to apply the comparative method, but he falls short because he's only using reconstructions of his own, but he doesn't demonstrate how he came up with the reconstructions, which require the comparative method. And it's just crazy. It's like, so unless you are a scholar who writes on this stuff, I wouldn't recommend this book at all. But for those of us who, this is just what we do, again, this is $135. So unless you just got changed like that, you can't really use it to justify Afro-Asiatic. But there's some people who will probably purchase this and try to use this to justify Afro-Asiatic, because again, there's contradicting views on certain things. So one scholar, Christopher Eric, claims that Chadic is Afro-Asiatic. The other scholar says Chadic is not Afro-Asiatic. Some say Omotic is not Afro-Asiatic. Some do say it is. Of course, the other author says Egyptian and genetic is not related, and then some other guy says Egyptian and Semitic is related. The only way that you can verify anything that any scholar says, but specifically any of the cats in here, is to learn how to do the science yourself. So this is why, like in my works, I always show my work. You can follow anything that I do. I give you the sound correspondences, like over here. Everything's laid out. If you disagree with an entry, I make sure that I have plenty of entries so that you can see, just like you see these tables here. This is in the appendix, so that you can't just summarily dismiss. You will never see anything like this in any Afrikaans work, because they don't do cross-language comparisons like this. And so it's sad. I done lost where I was at. So let me continue down. It says, can you make your books available in PDF format? I may consider that in the future. Are the G and H sound letters interchangeable for some languages? It just depends. That is something that, you don't assume. It would have to be proven. In an instance like this, it's either a condition change, or there would have to, more than likely, it would be dialectical. So that G sound may have been glottalized or aspirated, I should say. And, the dialect B, in contrast to dialect A, who has the G, they may have just gotten rid of the G and just left the H aspiration. But you would have to be able to show that synchronically. It's not a given. And so, it's possible, but you never just say a priori that is the case. That's why the work has to be done. And he says, are the E and A, or is the E and A sounds, letters interchangeable in some languages? Possible. Again, you have to do the work. It's any, and again, when you're talking about interchangeable, is especially with vowels. Vowels may not be so much interchangeable, but some vowels have grammatical, like in Semitic, vowels have grammatical functions in the language. And then in one language or dialect, or a dialect of a language, what is E or E in one dialect may be there may be a sound change or sound shift in that. Or if you're looking at it diachronically, in the earlier stage, it may have been which may have changed into So I wouldn't use interchangeable, in a sense of like an allophonic sound, without listing. But any sound is correspondent with any sound over time. Some consonants can become vowels over time. So, so I just would not say that, no. So the comparative method linguistics is simply about sound correspondences. I ain't skilled in this field, but even I understand that. Maybe because I ain't religious. Indeed, it's not simply of that, but that's the basis of it. Without the comparative method, without being able to establish the regularity of sound meaning correspondences, you can't make any other arguments. Period. And so when people try to argue for genetic relationship without doing that work first, it's just incomprehensible, which is why, for example, R.M.W. Dixon, in the citation that I stated earlier, stated that no linguist outside of Greenberg's school, agree with this method. No one uses that because it's inconsistent, because you can, the whole point of, for example, the scientific method in the more so-called hard sciences is to eliminate chance, because there's always a possibility that it's a coincidence that it appears that there's some kind of pattern you're detecting. So you have to figure out a way to eliminate a chance correspondence. And that's what, for linguistics, that's what the comparative method is designed to do. Is to eliminate the idea of chance, that is just a coincidence that this language over here, because remember, humans can only utter so many sounds. So there's bound to be languages that have words that sound the same, but they are not genetically related to each other. So we want to avoid just lookership. And so this helps, you to eliminate lookership. It says they are trying to do math without adding, subtracting, multiplying, or dividing. Exactly. He says, sorry, why you got a non-Bantu on the cover of your Bantu fundraising documentary? Below wouldn't suffice. I don't even know what the hell you're talking about. So the comparative method is simply about, okay, I think he may have repeated that. I recently discovered those changes in my Bantu languages: sing, sang, sang, shangwe, hangwe, meaning father, all from Proto-Bantu, sango, father. Yep. Dash is heavily bothered right now. Indeed. I can say something, but I won't for now. Do you the meaning in order the word Torah? I don't know. They're having a different discussion. It's all about sound correspondences instead of lookalikes. Exactly. He says, I'm just wondering why I'm on the cover of an Ancient Egypt Belongs to Bantu movie, Bait and Switch. Yeah, sure. How can these linguists sleep making perfect work when it comes to Indo-European, but put up this disgraceful show when it comes to African languages? Superiority complex at its best. You said it, not me. That's right. Do you believe in sound correspondences? He believes that he's on the cover because he's more than likely a white, pale descendant of Persians and Arabs and Greeks, and thinks that he connects to the Black Egyptians who founded the civilization. So he's in his feelings right now. So let him be. He said basically another Piltdown man, Sandman. Yep, Afro-Asiatic is a Piltdown man of linguistics. Can we acquire upcoming book in a PDF form? Nope. I may release them in the future or so. But as of now, they only be physical. Maybe a bad question. Is grammar involved with the comparative method or sound correspondences? In terms of morphology, but grammar, it's important, but you couldn't simply use grammar in terms of like syntax and the like word order and all of that to establish a genetic relationship, because that would fall under typology. But in terms of morphology, which have grammatical functions, that's important in the comparative method. But you first have to establish the sound meaning correspondences between the basic vocabulary. And just because you establish the sound meaning correspondences between the two or more languages does not mean that a few of those items may not be ultimately borrowed, because borrowed words can ultimately fall under the regularity of the sound meaning correspondences. So there's other ways to try to eliminate the loan words if you can't detect. But after a certain point, you can't detect loan words, like when you go just super far back in history, right? Because you just have nothing to compare it to. Let me see. Keisha, there are universal rules that exist in every discipline. If you refuse to learn the rules, you cannot operate in good faith in that discipline. Exactly. How do you define boundaries of a semantic field? That's kind of hard to regulate, and that's Matter of fact, that's a subject in one of the texts here. And what text was that? Was it Egyptian morphology and Afro-Asiatic perspective? I don't think so. Let me find this one. Here it is. It's Afro-Asiatic lexical comparison. And you can see like his graph here, he's arguing for that, you just can't, when you're trying to do the comparisons of words, and this I actually agree with this aspect of his conversation in terms of like certain words have kind of a matrix. It's like a field of meanings for which a word belongs. It's never really just a cut and dry thing. So, so for example, as discussing in Boli, the word for foot may also code for the word for land or the word for below in the language, right? Like it has those meanings, like to the foot, because the human body seems to be the primary reference and orienting reference point for the early speakers. So everything is in conjunction with the human body. So when you're talking about below, you're talking about to the foot. So you can't just say I'm looking for foot and the word for foot in another language, but the word for foot in language A may correspond to the word for below or ground in language B. But there's a process that you have to use to establish that. So you just can't arbitrarily just kind of jump in wide range. There has to be evidence of that semantic correspondence, or that semantic range between languages, related languages, and just kind of look at universals in that sense among languages. So this chapter, Afro-Asiatic lexical comparison, which may be the actual, I'm not sure, but I don't think, because I was looking for that one where he was referencing just kind of like 17, like 10 to 15 correspondences. I'll be back. I will be back. Anyway, that's something that he deals with here, but also in Boli, in his African Origins book for 2010. So has Theophilo Benga in his genetic relationship between ancient Egyptian and other African languages texts. So in matter of fact, and also, what is his name? Not Johann. I want to say it's a PhD dissertation on Indo-European. It's called System Proto-Indo-European. What is his name? Let's see. Let me because it's like Pisano. And why can't I think of this dude's name? There we go. Jonah Pisalo. And Systems Proto-Indo-European. Right. So if you go to this website, I'm going to share my screen. And nope. There we go. Right. So if you go to Proto-Indo-European Linguistics, or PIE, like PIE linguistics.org, the creator, the initial creator of the site, Dr. Jonah, or it could be Yona Pisalo, he wrote his PhD dissertation, and let me see if it's titled here. The solution. Here we go. So this is PhD dissertation from 2013. System Proto-Indo-European, the primary phoneme inventory and sound law system for Proto-Indo-European. And some of y'all may be familiar with me citing this text. But, he does a good job of the discussion of regulating the boundaries between semantimes for words, right? So if you go to that site and you click on that link, it'll lead you to another link, which will lead you to the PhD dissertation for which you can download. So, if you're not a linguist, anything past the introduction and first chapter is going to be very kind of difficult. But I think the introduction of first chapter and go to the methods chapter. Matter of fact, let me pull it up and see just where I'm going to tell you where to go. So let me stop sharing the screen and reshare the screen. Let me put that out. I'm going to do a reshare the screen. To kind of share. So this is his dissertation. And so, the table of contents, the comparative method of reconstruction Indo-European. So you're going to want to read. So yeah, everything after the first chapter, anything after the first chapter. So starting with chapter 2 is going to be something that you're really just going to have to be into historical linguistics, and especially in comparison, in terms of Indo-European itself, is the more science and detailed stuff. But I think that if you just read the first part here up to page 71, you can follow along and you'll get some insight into the film, but especially chapter 1.3. So this is where I think your question will get answered in a very detailed way. The other two books that I recommended are in French, so I'm not sure if you read French, but if you want a good analysis in English, get this dissertation. Read all the way up into section 1.3. So you can see semantics, symbol function and semantics, semantic fields of Proto-Indo-European root matrices. So he's going to introduce you to this concept of root matrices, let's just say. And then you can go further and further if you want. If you're just feeling kind of bold and courageous, you want to delve into that, then you could. But so I hope that answered your question. Says, yep, a lot of lookership and not enough scholarship. Yep. Says Lord, I'm sure the linguistic patterns are collective history mirror the psychomythic patterns in the collective psyche. Yeah, to an extent. He says, what does genetics say about the affinity of ancient Egyptians to other African populations? It just depends on, which mummies they study. So far, they've only studied mummies for the most part, with the exception like one or two, for the most part, that are clearly descendants of folks who came from the Middle East. Let me see. Gula says, why you never talk about limitations in the comparative method? I do talk about limitations in the comparative method, and all the books that I recommend talk about limitations in the comparative method. And if you would have paid attention to the actual slides, you would have read one of the alleged limitations of the comparative method, talking about more than 8,000 years. So this is what we always got to do. We always got to pay attention and not just be listening to have a response immediately and just not even really paying attention, just responding without listening. So the limitations was discussed in this very channel. I cited it, and you can go visit that. And then if you read this text, you're going to find a contradiction to that, because Christopher Ehret, in his closing remarks, talks about how these so-called limits have themselves never been tested, right? And he points out something very poignantly about how, you know, there's no grounds for a lot of arguments. So his chapter, it actually, you know, there's other people who are with him on here. So Devin Vyas, Shafara Asefa, Lafayette Gaston, Tiffany Gleason, and Andrew Kitchen. And so this is chapter 9, Ancient Egyptians' Place in Afro-Asiatic Language Family. This is Christopher Harris' chapter, but read the closing remarks. And he deals with the non-basis for a lot of conclusions that certain scholars have come to that themselves haven't been tested, which is ironic coming from him since he never uses the comparative method himself. So it'd be different if he actually applied the comparative method. But you know, but one of the so-called limitations in which they discuss is that it's not good for anything past 8,000 years, 8 to 10,000 years, when in fact that has never been tested and it's untestable because you can't date languages. There's you know, a language is psychological. It's not genetic. So again, you can't dig up somebody's grave and assume that this person in the grave has spoken a particular language. You can never date unless you have writing going back to some identical, like on some pottery that has some organic material that you can carbon date and do that. You cannot date a language. It's impossible to date languages. And so it says, good teacher that demonstrate how they come to know what they know. Exactly. Many believe that finding house is an Egyptian word for Negro. What are your thoughts? I don't even know what word that's supposed to be. If you can transliterate that in actual Egyptian language, the Meta-Metric transliteration system, we can look it up. But I've never heard of that. So let's look at that. Fine house. So I'm just on Google right now. So I haven't heard that term. So it says fine house is in the Bible. So it's not an ancient Egyptian word. Let me see. According to the Hebrew Bible, fine house, Phineas. Let me share my screen so that y'all can be with me. And so we're just going to go to good old Wikipedia and take it off full screen. Let me, hopefully y'all can see that. It says, Phinehas was a priest during the Israelites' Exodus journey, the grandson of Aaron and son of Eleazar, the high priest, assuming himself as a youth. Displeased with his immortality name, probably comes from the Egyptian Pa-Nehesi. Okay, according to, so now I see what you're saying. Okay, so this is what I needed. The actual Egyptian, so Pa-Nehesi, according to Oxford, the Bible also uses Egyptian and Nubian names for the land of his people. So no, it wouldn't be Negro, because Nehesi doesn't mean Negro. It's not a word that means black in the Egyptian language. So Pa is the masculine definite article in the New Kingdom. So it's just saying the Nehesi, the Nubian, but it doesn't mean Negro. But if you believe that the Nubians were the stereotypical Negroes, then you know that would be the relation, but it wouldn't be itself a word for black or negro in Latin. So I hope that answers your question. Just here we go again, talking about something he don't study. And he can't share with us the limitations of any method, just like he says, you don't study this, just asat. That's not even a complete sentence. I don't even know what you're saying. I'm gonna stop stumping you, saying sorry, I feel bad. I guess. So that boy's fried. D. John is in the podcast. What he said right now is a limitation without evidence for connections between word meanings, foot, land, below, etc. If you can't send out that, we can sit in the light of the Kepler sun, but rather choose to play with pigs. I don't know what y'all talking about. How you gonna tell someone what they study when studying the Egyptian language? We made an emphasis to make the basis of the argument. Again, some teachers regarding the entire field of linguistics. You never said that before, so now it appears. How did you come to the conclusion of sorrow without knowing how to do it exactly? So Sean, you ain't even on the continent. How are you so tribal? Yeah, Sean, you ain't on the continent. You over here in America somewhere talking that ish. 42 says tribal was earthy. He says, are you in contact with Theophilo Benga? Not directly, but I can get a hold of him through a third party. He says, see. Is the 8,000 limitation similar to the meta nature not being translated? It seems like if it can be done, it's doable. See, that's just the problem. See, when the historical comparative method is applied to, for example, Egyptian and Yoruba, or Egyptian and Chiluba or Kikongo, we discover these genetic relationships that cannot be explained by chance. And so if that limitation was right, that means that the split between ancient Egyptian, Bantu, and Yoruba could not be more than 8,000 years ago. Right? So it's relatively recent, because according to them, if we use the comparative method, we should, and since Afro-Asiatic supposed to be like 10 to 15,000 years ago, and Niger Congo and all of these supposed to have, just so far in history, we should not be able to detect any kind of sound meaning correspondences between these languages. But we do. So either Afro-Asiatic, Niger Congo, and Nilo-Saharan are not valid language constructs, or the limitations don't exist, or both. Again, you can't date languages. There's no way that you can date any language. It's not an organic thing. It doesn't obey consistent. This is why nobody uses lexicostatistics, when trying to make these arguments. It's pseudoscience. And people think that you can add some math into something and that makes it rigorous, and then you could just start making inferences where the evidence on the ground does not substantiate the claim. So you got to admit, mathematics is logic. It is not science. And something can make sense mathematically, but it can not be a representation of reality, because it has to be grounded in evidence. It's just, it's just something you just got to kind of know in the field. He said, that's right. Your prestigious Afro-Asiatic hanging on the rafters. I could tell English is not your first language, because I don't understand what you're saying. What do you think about glottal chronology? Just what I said. It's BS. You can't date languages. Do you have any info about the upcoming book, Jean-Claude Mboli? In terms of a release date, I'm not sure. He said maybe the end of next year or kind of mid next year it should be done. But this book is a continuation of his 2010 book, which he came out with, of course, 13 years ago. And he's going to be dealing with Semitic languages and Indo-European in conjunction with further analysis of Negro Egyptian. What did I say? I'm sorry. The Proto-Indo-European. So he's dealing with Indo-European, Proto-Indo-European, and Semitic languages in relationship to Negro Egyptian. So they must be getting paid to troll you. They are dedicated. Yep. No, I think they volunteer. They'll do it for free. Keisha Cowwood, 10 years of trolling, indeed. Keisha, so you agree with an Assange claim the ancient Egyptian belongs to Bantu? And we've been getting hella tribal since the Me 23 test. I don't know what you're talking about there. So, but that seems to be it. So I've been on for basically 2.5 hours. And so I think this is a good spot to end it. And so again, the book Race and Identity in Ancient Egypt, Volume 1 is on pre-sale now towards an etymology of the place name Kemet. And you can go to asarimhotep.com and type in the word Mbongi and you would get a discount. So now it is at $30. And so it's going to go up another $10 or $15 come August. So get your pre-sale copy now and you will get a sample chapter from the text. So with that said, I do appreciate each and every one of you. And until next time, y'all be easy. Peace.